My name is Andreas Wilson. I'm 28 years old and finally felt like my life was coming together. Good tech job, nice apartment, even a girlfriend who actually gets my weird sense of humor. Then last Friday, my phone buzzed with a text from my dad family meeting. Our house. Sunday at noon. Financial matters to discuss. My stomach dropped instantly. Growing up, financial matters always meant one thing: I was a burden again. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to family manipulation and want to see how I finally broke free. I should probably start by telling you a bit about my current situation. I work as a software developer at a mid-sized tech company in Chicago. Nothing flashy like Google or Apple, but it pays well enough that I have a decent one-bedroom apartment downtown and can afford to take Elaine, my girlfriend of 2 years out, for nice dinners occasionally. I even started putting money into a retirement account last year, which felt like some kind of official adulting milestone. But my life wasn't always this stable. Growing up in suburban Illinois with my parents Harold and Dorothy Wilson, and my younger sister Rachel was complicated. From the outside, we looked like the perfect middle-class American family. Dad worked as an accountant. Mom was an administrative assistant who went part-time after we were born. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with a small backyard. We took one modest vacation each summer, usually driving to a nearby state park or visiting relatives. But inside our home, there was always this undercurrent of calculation. Every expense related to me was noted, mentioned, sometimes held against me. I remember standing in the school supplies aisle when I was 10, and my mother sighing dramatically as she put a package of colored pencils in our cart. Do you really need the 24-pack? The 12-pack is $3 cheaper? This wasn't about actual poverty. We were comfortably middle class. It was about making me feel like my very existence was a financial inconvenience. When I wanted to join the soccer team in 6th grade, my father sat me down for a financial discussion about the cost of cleats, uniform fees, and how much gas they'd spend driving me to practices. I ended up doing extra chores for months to pay off my soccer expenses, even though none of my teammates had similar arrangements with their parents. College application season was another nightmare. Each application fee was scrutinized. $75 just to apply. They probably won't even accept you. When acceptance letters came in, the celebration lasted approximately 30 seconds before pivoting to, well, now we need to figure out how to pay for this. The strange thing was, Rachel never seemed to get the same treatment. 2 years younger than me, she wanted to take dance classes, and suddenly money wasn't an issue. She joined 3 different clubs in high school, all with fees, and there were no spreadsheets tracking her debt to the family. I never resented her for it. It wasn't her fault, but it did make me wonder why I was treated differently. The moment I turned 18, I moved out. My parents seemed almost relieved. I cobbled together enough scholarship money, student loans, and part-time jobs to put myself through state college without asking them for a dime. I studied computer science, lived on ramen and coffee, and graduated with decent grades and manageable debt. Since then, I've kept my parents at arm's length. I visit on major holidays, send birthday and Christmas cards, and call maybe once a month for brief, surface-level updates. They know the broad strokes of my life, where I work, that I'm dating Elaine, but nothing deep, nothing real. So when my father's text came through, demanding a family meeting about financial matters, all those childhood feelings came rushing back. That sense of being a burden, a walking expense report rather than a son. I called my best friend Marcus that night, pacing around my apartment as I explained the situation. Dude, that sounds weird, Marcus said. You're a grown adult. What financial matters could they possibly need to discuss? No idea, I replied, running a hand through my hair. Maybe they're retiring early, or moving. Though why they'd need a formal meeting for that? Could be something else, Marcus said carefully. Just go in with your eyes open, okay, and call me right after. Elaine was equally concerned when I told her. Want me to come with you? She offered, her forehead creased with worry. We'd been dating long enough that she'd met my parents several times and picked up on the strained dynamics. No, I think I need to handle this myself. I told her, though, part of me wanted the backup. That Sunday morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I showered, dressed in casual but nice clothes. No need to give them something else to criticize, and got in my car for the 40-minute drive to my childhood home. As I pulled onto the familiar street, lined with nearly identical two-story houses, each with its perfectly maintained lawn, I felt myself regressing. Suddenly, I wasn't 28-year-old Andreas with a career and an apartment. I was 17 again, walking on eggshells, trying to minimize the space I took up in the world. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute, hands still on the steering wheel, trying to quiet the anxiety rising in my chest. Whatever this was about, I reminded myself I was an adult now. I had built a life independent from them. They couldn't control me anymore. With that thought firmly in mind, I grabbed my phone, took a deep breath, and headed for the front door, a sense of dread growing with each step. I knocked on the door out of habit, even though I'd grown up in this house. Old patterns die hard. My mother answered, her face, arranged in what passed for a smile and our family lips slightly upturned, but eyes calculating, assessing. "Andreas," she said, stepping back to let me in. "You're right on time." The house smelled exactly the same, a combination of my mother's floral perfume furniture polish and the faint scent of whatever she'd cooked last. The living room looked unchanged, like a museum exhibit of middle-class suburban life circa 2005. Same beige couch, same landscape paintings, same family photos, where everyone was smiling, but no one looked genuinely happy. My father was sitting in his recliner, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some papers. He glanced up briefly. "Son," he said with a nod. Not a warm greeting, just acknowledgement of my presence. Rachel was already there, perched awkwardly on the edge of the couch. She gave me a quick, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked uncomfortable, which immediately heightened my alertness. Rachel had always been better at navigating our parents' moods than I was. "Hi," I said, sitting next to her. "How's the new job going?" She'd recently started working at a marketing firm downtown. "It's good," she replied, but before she could elaborate, our father cleared his throat. "Let's move to the dining room," he said. "Your mother has prepared coffee." The four of us migrated to the formal dining room, another space that was rarely used, except for important occasions. My mother disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a tray of coffee cups, setting them down with precision. Once we were all seated, my father folded his hands on the table. "So, Andreas, tell us more about your position. I understand software developers are in high demand these days." The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made me wary. "It's going well," I said cautiously. "The company's growing, and I enjoy the work." "And the compensation must be quite good," my mother added, stirring cream into her coffee, "especially for someone your age." I shifted in my seat. "I'm comfortable," I replied, deliberately vague. "6 figures," yet my father pressed never one for subtlety. I felt my defenses rising. "Dad, what's this about? Your text mentioned financial matters." My parents exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Then my father reached for the folder of papers he'd brought to the table. "Your mother and I have been discussing our finances recently," he began, opening the folder. "As we approach retirement age, we've been reviewing our investments, expenses, and outstanding debts." I nodded, still not seeing where this was going. "And in doing so," he continued, "we realize there's a significant investment we made that has yet to see any return." My mother picked up seamlessly. "We've calculated everything we spent raising you, Andreas. Food, clothing, your portion of the mortgage, utilities, school supplies, medical expenses, everything from birth until you turned 18. I blinked, certain I'd misunderstood. "Wait, what?" My father slid a paper across the table. I looked down at what appeared to be an itemized bill. There were categories: nutrition, housing, education, healthcare, each with precise dollar amounts attached. At the bottom, a total was circled in red ink: $127,458.32. "This is a joke, right?" I looked up, waiting for someone to crack a smile. "This is very serious," my father said. "Now that you're successful, it's time for you to repay what we invested in raising you." I looked at Rachel, whose eyes were fixed on her coffee cup, then back at my parents, who were watching me expectantly. "You're billing me for being your child." My voice sounded distant to my own ears like I was underwater. We sacrificed a lot for you, Andreas. My mother said, her voice, taking on that martyred tone I knew so well. Vacations we didn't take. Promotions your father turned down because they would have required relocation. Countless hours, driving you to activities, helping with homework. Which is why we're not charging for labor, my father interjected, as if this were a reasonable concession. Just the hard costs. I stared at the paper, trying to process what was happening. There was a line item for birthday gifts and Christmas presents, totaling over $15,000. Another for sports and extracurricular activities at $12,000. Even car insurance teen driver edition at $3,200. We're not expecting a lump sum. My father continued, apparently mistaking my silence for consideration rather than shock. We've drafted a payment plan. $500 monthly would clear the debt in about 20 years. Be grateful we're only charging you this much, my mother added, and no interest, though considering inflation. I looked up from the paper, anger building beneath my disbelief. You can't be serious. Completely serious, my father replied. We supported you for 18 years. Now it's your turn to support us. What about Rachel? I asked, glancing at my sister, who looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. Rachel's situation is different, my mother said dismissively. She's still establishing herself. Of course. Different rules as always. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Part of me wanted to crumple the bill, throw it in their faces, and walk out. But something stopped me, a realization that this moment represented everything wrong with our relationship, and maybe, just maybe, it was an opportunity to finally address it. I'd like to review this, I said, keeping my voice steady as I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Before I respond, my parents exchanged another look, this one triumphant. They thought I was going to comply. That's reasonable, my father said, magnanimously. We can discuss payment arrangements next weekend. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further without saying things I might regret. I stood up, leaving my coffee untouched. I should go, I said. I have some thinking to do. As I walked to the door, Rachel followed me. Andy, I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know about this until today. I gave her a tight smile. Not your fault, I said. I'll call you later. As I got into my car and pulled away from the house, the bill seemed to burn in my pocket. This wasn't about money. It was about something much deeper, much more broken. And for the first time, I was ready to confront it head on. I drove without direction, my mind reeling. The subdivisions and strip malls blurred past as I tried to process what had just happened. My parents had given me an invoice for existing, for being their child. Eventually, I found myself parked at a scenic overlook by the lake, a spot I used to escape to during high school, when home felt suffocating. I pulled out my phone and called Elaine. How did it go? She asked. They gave me a bill, I said, my voice hollow. For raising me. They… what? Her voice rose sharply. I explained the situation, recounting the itemized expenses, the payment plan, my mother's comment about being grateful. Andreas, that's not normal, Elaine said firmly. That's not what parents do. You know that, right? I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. Logically, yes. But there's this part of me that's 10 years old again, believing I'm a burden, that my existence is an inconvenience they've been tracking on a spreadsheet all these years. Listen to me. Elaine's voice was fierce with protective anger. You were a child. They chose to have you. Every dollar they spent was their responsibility, their choice. You don't owe them a penny. Her certainty helped steady me. I know. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. After talking with Elaine, I texted Marcus Barr. Tonight. Need to talk. I spent the rest of the afternoon driving around, revisiting places from my childhood. The elementary school where teachers praised my math skills while my parents focused on the cost of field trips. The soccer field, where I scored my first goal, looking to the sidelines to see my father checking his watch rather than cheering. The high school where I graduated with honors, my parents' primary concern being how quickly we could leave the overlong ceremony. Each memory carried a price tag now, each moment of childhood categorized as an expense rather than an experience. That evening I met Marcus at our usual bar, a low-key place with decent burgers and privacy. I showed him the bill. "Holy shit," he said, eyes widening as he scanned the document. "This is messed up on so many levels." I took a long drink of my beer. "Tell me about it." "You know what this is, right, Marcus?" Pushed the paper back toward me. "This is them telling you how they've always seen your relationship as a transaction." The word hit home. Transaction. That's exactly what it was. "I've been trying so hard," I said quietly, "my whole life. Working to earn their approval, their love. Getting good grades, landing a solid job, becoming financially independent, so they wouldn't have to help me. I thought if I checked all the right boxes, eventually they'd see me as worthy." Marcus shook his head. "Andy, you can't earn unconditional love from people who don't know how to give it. That's not a failure on your part. It's a failure on theirs." As we talked, an idea began forming in my mind. "What if I made my own invoice?" I said slowly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For everything they didn't give me. The emotional support, the celebration of achievements, the unconditional love that was supposed to come standard with parenthood." I tapped the bill. "They want to make this about money. Fine. Let's see the full accounting." By the time I got home that night, the idea had taken root. This could be my opportunity to finally make them see how their treatment had affected me, to quantify the invisible costs of growing up feeling like a burden. The next week was difficult. I moved through my workdays in a fog, my mind constantly returning to the bill and my planned response. My productivity suffered enough that my boss, Franklin, called me into his office on Wednesday. "Everything okay, Andreas?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "You've seemed distracted this week." I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "Family issues. I'm working through some stuff with my parents." Franklin nodded sympathetically. "Take the time you need. Your project deadlines are flexible. Family comes first." The irony of that statement, "family comes first," wasn't lost on me. That evening, I had my regular session with Dr. Pamela Curtis, the therapist I'd been seeing for about a year, to work through what I'd previously called general anxiety, but now recognized as the aftermath of emotional neglect. "They gave me a bill," I told her, still unable to say it without a disbelieving laugh. I showed her the document. Dr. Curtis studied it, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes revealing concern. "How did this make you feel, Andreas?" "At first, shocked. Then angry. Then validated in a weird way." I shifted in my seat. It confirmed what I've always suspected, but tried to deny that they see me as a cost center, not a son. "This kind of behavior aligns with what we've discussed about your parents' patterns," she said carefully. "There are narcissistic elements here. The inability to see you as a separate person with your own needs and feelings, rather than an extension of themselves or a means to an end." We spent the session discussing my planned response, creating a counter invoice that would make visible all the invisible costs of their parenting. "This could be a powerful exercise for your own healing," Dr. Curtis acknowledged. "But I want you to consider what you're hoping to achieve by sharing it with them. Are you looking for recognition? Apology, restitution?" I thought about it. Honestly, I think I just want to stand up for myself. For once, I want to tell the truth about our relationship without minimizing or making excuses for them. Even if nothing changes, I'll know I didn't just take it lying down this time. As the week progressed, my counter invoice took shape. Each night after work, I sat at my computer, documenting memories, researching costs, building my response. It was painful but also strangely liberating, like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. The anger and hurt I'd suppressed for so long found expression in this document. I was finally acknowledging the truth: my parents had failed me in fundamental ways, and it wasn't my fault. I hadn't been too expensive, too needy, too much. I had been a child deserving of unconditional love and support, and they had treated me like a balance sheet. By Friday, I knew what I needed to do. I would face them, counter invoice in hand, and for the first time in my life, I would tell them exactly how I felt. Creating my counter invoice became an unexpectedly therapeutic process. I approached it methodically, the way I would a complex coding project, breaking it down into categories and subcategories. First, I researched the actual costs of therapy. I'd been seeing Dr. Curtis weekly for a year, at $150 per session after insurance specifically to address issues stemming from my childhood. That was $7,800 right there. Then I estimated future therapy needs another few years, at least adding another $23,400. But the emotional costs were harder to quantify. How do you put a price tag on never feeling good enough? On achievements, celebrated half-heartedly or ignored entirely. On constantly hearing about the sacrifice of basic parental responsibilities. I called Elaine for perspective. Think about it like emotional labor, she suggested. What would someone have to pay you to endure what you did? That framing helped. I created line items, cost of confidence, rebuilding after years of being treated as a financial burden, therapy for anxiety, developed from walking on eggshells at home, missed career networking opportunities due to being discouraged from attending expensive professional events during college. I added specific incidents with their emotional toll. High school graduation, 2008 parents complained about ceremony length rather than celebrating achievement. Cost first major accomplishment diminished. College move-in, day 2011. Parents left campus early to beat traffic, while other families spent day helping students settle in. Cost reinforcement that convenience was more important than support. First software development job offer 2015, parental response focused on finally paying your own way, rather than career milestone. Cost inability to share achievements without shame. Then I calculated what financial advisors call opportunity costs, things I missed out on because of their approach to parenting. The study abroad program I declined, because I knew they'd make me feel guilty about the expense. The internship I couldn't take, because it was unpaid, and they refused to help with living expenses during that summer, unlike many of my peers' parents. I included a section for services rendered to them over the years. IT support and computer maintenance. 2015, to present approximately 25 hours annually at industry standard rate of $75 per hour. Total $7,500. Tax preparation assistance, 3 years at $400 per year, $1,200. Home repairs and maintenance during visits, plumbing, painting, lawn care. Estimated value, $3,200. Elaine reviewed my draft, adding suggestions and helping me refine the language to be clear but not petty. This isn't about getting back at them, she reminded me. It's about showing them the reality of your relationship. By Wednesday, I had a comprehensive document. But something was missing. Numbers alone couldn't capture the full story. I decided to include a letter explaining the invoice. Not accusatory or angry, but honest about how their treatment had affected me and what I needed from our relationship going forward. The purpose of this document, I wrote, is not to demand payment. Money has already played too large a role in our relationship. Rather, it's to make visible what has always been invisible. The cost of growing up feeling like a financial burden rather than a beloved child. I continued, I'm proud of the person I've become largely despite, rather than because of the environment I grew up in. I have a fulfilling career, meaningful relationships, and a life built on my own terms. But I carry wounds that shouldn't be there, doubts about my worth, that were planted early and have taken years to begin uprooting. Working on the document during lunch breaks and evenings meant I was distracted at the office. My colleagues noticed. You look exhausted, Stephanie commented during our team meeting. Everything okay? Family stuff, I replied vaguely. Must be serious, Jackson added. You've been a million miles away all week. I appreciated their concern, but wasn't ready to share the full story with my workplace. I'm handling it, I assured them. Should be resolved soon. Thursday night, I finalized everything. The itemized counter invoice totaled just over $197,000, significantly more than their bill to me. But the number wasn't really the point. The point was making tangible what they had never acknowledged, that parenting isn't just about financial provision, and children aren't investments expecting monetary returns. I printed 2 copies of everything, the invoice and the letter, and put them in a professional-looking folder. Then I called Rachel. I'm coming over this weekend, I told her, with a response to their bill. What kind of response, she asked cautiously. A counter invoice. For the emotional cost of how they raised me. There was a long pause. Wow, she finally said. That's bold. Too bold, I asked, suddenly doubting myself. No, she said slowly. Actually, it's about time someone stood up to them. Just be prepared. They won't take it well. I know, I replied. But I can't just write them a check and pretend this is normal. I need to do this for me even if nothing changes with them. I understand, Rachel said. And Andreas, I'm on your side. Okay, whatever happens. Her support meant more than she knew. Throughout childhood, we'd been subtly pitted against each other, her as the less expensive, less troublesome child, me as the costly problem. Breaking that dynamic and finding solidarity as adults felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from us. Friday night I barely slept. I kept rehearsing what I would say, imagining their reactions, planning my responses. By Saturday morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired like I'd consumed too much caffeine on too little sleep. As I got dressed, choosing a button-down shirt and slacks armor of adulthood, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back was tense, but determined. For the first time, I was going to speak my truth without filtering it through their expectations. Whatever happened next, I would know I'd been honest with them, and more importantly, with myself. I tucked the folder under my arm, got in my car, and started the drive to my parents' house. My heart pounding, but my resolve firm. The drive to my parents' house seemed both endless and too short. Every mile brought a mixture of anxiety and determination that left my hands clammy on the steering wheel. The folder on the passenger seat felt like it contained explosives rather than paper. When I arrived, both my parents' cars were in the driveway, my father's meticulously maintained sedan and my mother's practical crossover. Both middle-of-the-road vehicles they'd purchased after extensive research on depreciation rates and maintenance costs. Even their car choices reflected their approach to life, calculated, practical, joyless. I sat in my car for a few minutes, breathing deeply the way Dr. Curtis had taught me. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. Repeat until the world stops spinning. When I felt steady enough, I grabbed the folder and walked to the front door. This time, I didn't knock. I used my key, a small assertion of belonging they couldn't deny me. "Hello," I called out as I entered. "In the dining room," my father replied. Of course. The formal setting for formal business. They were sitting exactly as they had been the previous weekend, like actors who had frozen in place when the curtain fell and were only now resuming their performance. The only difference was Rachel's absence. "Andreas," my mother said, with a tight smile. "Right on time again." My father didn't bother with pleasantries. "Have you had time to review the payment options?" There it was, the assumption that I would comply, that I existed to meet their expectations. Not even a question of whether I agreed with the premise, just how I would fulfill their demands. "I've reviewed your bill," I said, taking the same seat I'd occupied last weekend, "and I've prepared a response." I placed my folder on the table, but didn't open it yet. "A counter offer." My father raised an eyebrow. "I thought we were clear about the amount." "Not a counter offer," I replied. "A counter invoice." My mother's smile faltered. "I don't understand." "Let me explain." I opened the folder and removed my documents, keeping them face toward me for the moment. "You presented me with a bill for the costs of raising me. Basic parental obligations that you voluntarily took on when you decided to have children." My father started to speak, but I held up a hand. For once, I would not be interrupted. "I've been thinking a lot about our relationship this week, about growing up in this house, and I realized something important. If we're going to reduce our family relationship to financial transactions, we need to look at the complete ledger." I turned the first page of my counter invoice around so they could see it. "This is an accounting of what I've paid for your failure to provide the emotional support that should come with parenthood." My mother's face flushed. "This is ridiculous." "Is it I slid the document closer to them?" "Let's go through it together." I pointed to the first section. Therapy costs, 1 year of weekly sessions at $150 each, specifically to address anxiety and self-worth issues stemming from childhood. $7,800 to date, with projected additional costs of $23,400. My father scoffed. You can't seriously expect us to pay for your therapy. I don't expect you to pay any of this, I said calmly, just as I don't expect to pay your bill. The point isn't payment, it's recognition. I turned to the next page. Specific incidents. High school graduation when you complained about sitting through the ceremony and rushed me through photos so we could beat the traffic. College move-in day when you left after 30 minutes while other parents spent the day helping their kids settle in. My first job offer when your primary concern was how quickly I could get off your health insurance. With each example, I could see the defensive anger building in their expressions, but I continued my voice steady. Opportunities missed due to lack of support study abroad program. I declined because I knew you'd make me feel guilty. Networking events I couldn't attend because you refused to help with professional attire. The internship I turned down because it was unpaid, and unlike other parents who supported their children through similar opportunities, you made it clear I was on my own. My mother's face had gone from flushed to pale. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. Then there's the services I've provided to you over the years, I continued. IT support every time your computer has an issue. Tax preparation help. Home repairs during visits. At market rates, that's nearly $12,000 of free labor. I finished by explaining the emotional costs, the ones hardest to quantify but most significant. The constant feeling of being a burden. The belief that I had to earn love through achievement or financial success. The inability to share good news without bracing for it to be diminished. The total comes to $197,436, I concluded. But as I said, this isn't about money. It's about recognizing that our relationship has never been what it should have been. You've treated me as a financial obligation rather than a son, and I've spent my life trying to be worthy of basic parental love that should have been freely given. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is how you repay us, with insults and accusations. After everything we sacrificed for you. That's exactly my point, I replied. You see parenthood as a sacrifice rather than a choice you made. You've kept a running tally of every expense, waiting for the day you could present me with the bill. We gave you everything, my mother said, her voice trembling with anger. A roof over your head, food, education. You gave me the legal minimum, I interrupted, and made sure I knew the cost of every bit of it. That's not love, that's obligation. You were always difficult, my father shot back, always wanting more than we could give. I shook my head. I wanted what every child wants, to feel valued, to feel like my existence wasn't a burden. To be loved without conditions. The three of us stared at each other across the table, decades of unspoken resentments suddenly laid bare. Then the front door opened, and Rachel walked in. Sorry I'm late, she said, though her timing seemed anything but accidental. My parents looked at her in surprise. Rachel, we didn't know you were coming, my mother said. Andreas told me about the meeting. She sat down next to me, a united front. I hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated, and about the bill you gave him. My father dismissed her with a wave. This is between us and your brother. Actually, Rachel said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. When addressing our parents, it's not. Because the way you treat him affects me too. And the way you raised both of us affects the kind of relationship we have with each other. She turned to me. I saw your counter invoice. Andreas showed me last night. This wasn't strictly true. I'd told her about it, but hadn't shown her the document. But I understood what she was doing, establishing herself as my ally. And I agree with every word, she continued. You've always treated us like investments rather than children. The only difference is you decided Andreas was a bad investment, and I was a good one. My parents' expressions shifted from anger to shock. They'd never faced a united front from their children before. This is absurd, my father finally said. We're your parents. We provided for you. We did our duty. Duty isn't enough, I replied quietly. A parent's job isn't just to keep a child alive until adulthood. It's to make them feel loved, supported, valued. I pushed the counter invoice and my letter across the table. I don't expect you to understand or agree with everything in here, but I need you to know that if you want a relationship with me going forward, things need to change. I won't accept being treated as a financial obligation anymore." My mother picked up the letter with shaking hands. My father stared at the invoice, his face unreadable. "The choice is yours," I concluded. "Either acknowledge the problems in our relationship and work to fix them, or accept that our contact will be minimal from now on." For the first time in my memory, my parents seemed genuinely speechless. Their faces had gone from red with anger to pale with shock, as they realized both their children were serious. This wasn't just another negotiation they could control. And in that moment, looking at their stunned expressions, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had always accompanied confrontation with them was gone, replaced by a calm certainty that I was at last standing in my truth. The silence lasted only moments before my father's shock transformed back into rage. He snatched up my counter invoice, his hands shaking. "This is nothing but self-pitying nonsense," he spat, tearing the paper in half. "After everything we did for you." My mother had moved from stunned silence to manipulative tears, a tactic I'd seen countless times growing up. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed, clutching my letter. "We only wanted what was best for you. We sacrificed everything." I watched my father tear my carefully prepared document into smaller and smaller pieces, a physical representation of how they'd always treated my feelings. But this time I didn't feel the familiar rush of shame and anxiety. I felt oddly calm, like I was watching a storm from inside a secure shelter. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. "I've said what I needed to say." Rachel stood with me. "We're both leaving," she added firmly. My father pointed a finger at me, his face contorted with anger. "If you walk out that door without resolving this bill, don't bother coming back." It was meant to be an ultimatum, a threat to force compliance, but it landed as a release. "That's your choice," I replied. "I hope you'll reconsider once you've had time to think." Rachel and I walked out together, neither of us looking back at the spluttering threats and emotional appeals that followed us to the door. Outside in the driveway, we both took deep breaths of the fresh spring air. "Are you okay?" I asked her. She gave a shaky laugh. "No. But also, yes." That was terrifying and liberating at the same time. "I didn't expect you to show up," I admitted. "Thank you for having my back." "I should have done it years ago," she said, regret evident in her voice. "I always knew they treated you differently, but I was so afraid of losing their approval that I never said anything." We walked to our cars, then stood talking for nearly an hour, having the most honest conversation we'd ever shared as siblings. Rachel revealed that despite the preferential treatment, I'd perceived she'd felt just as controlled and diminished, just in different ways. "They need me to be dependent," she explained. "That's why they've always been more financially generous with me. It's not generosity, it's control. They help with my rent, but then feel entitled to drop by without warning. They contributed to my car, but then monitor where I go with it." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The real reason they're suddenly asking you for money is that they're in financial trouble. Dad made some bad investments, and they've been living beyond their means for years. They're not just being cruel, they're desperate." This new information shifted my perspective slightly, adding a layer of understanding, without changing the fundamental wrongness of their approach. They were drowning, and saw me as a convenient life raft with no acknowledgement of the irony, after years of making me feel like a financial burden. "What happens now?" Rachel asked, as we finally prepared to leave. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But whatever it is, let's promise to stay connected. They've kept us apart for too long." The aftermath unfolded exactly as I'd expected. First came the silent treatment, 3 days of no contact. A tactic that had worked throughout my childhood to make me anxious and apologetic. When that failed to produce results, the angry messages started. My father sent a terse email titled, "Your responsibility," in all caps, reiterating that I owed them for my upbringing and threatening vague consequences if I didn't man up and pay. My mother's approach was more emotionally manipulative, long rambling texts about ingratitude, sleepless nights, and how my cruelty was affecting her health. I showed everything to Dr. Curtis during our next session. "How are you feeling about holding your boundary?" she asked. Stronger than I expected, I replied. There's still this conditioned guilt, but it's like I can observe it without being consumed by it now. Then came the flying monkeys, their term for the relatives and family friends sent to pressure the target of emotional manipulation. My aunt called, ostensibly to check in, but really to tell me how worried everyone was about my parents. My father's college friend emailed to remind me of family obligation. Even my mother's sister, who had barely spoken to me in years, suddenly had opinions about my responsibility to my parents. To each one, I gave the same calm response. This is between my parents and me. I appreciate your concern, but this is a private family matter. Elaine and Marcus provided unwavering support throughout. Elaine stayed over more often, ensuring I wasn't alone with my thoughts during the hardest moments. Marcus kept me distracted with basketball games and hiking trips when the pressure felt overwhelming. At work, I finally opened up to Anthony, a coworker who had mentioned his own complicated family dynamics in the past. His perspective was invaluable. My father did something similar, he told me over lunch. Not a literal bill, but the same mentality that I owed him for basic parenting. I cut contact 5 years ago, and it was the healthiest decision I've ever made. Did he ever understand why? I asked. Anthony shook his head. Some people aren't capable of that kind of self-reflection. I had to accept that he might never see things from my perspective and make peace with that for my own sake. As weeks passed, my parents' approaches evolved. The angry messages gave way to brief, half-hearted apologies. Sorry if you felt hurt, but you need to understand our position, always followed by renewed pressure about the bill. I maintained my boundary, responding only to say I'm open to rebuilding our relationship when you're ready to acknowledge the real issues between us. The bill is a symptom, not the cause. After consulting with Dr. Curtis, I decided to go low contact rather than no contact. I set firm parameters: email only, no phones, or unannounced visits, limited to once weekly communication. This gives you control over the engagement, Dr. Curtis explained. You can respond on your timeline when you're emotionally prepared. Rachel and I grew closer through the estrangement, speaking almost daily and meeting for dinner, weekly, building the sibling relationship we'd been subtly discouraged from developing. The first holiday season was the hardest. Thanksgiving had always been spent at my parents' house, following their rigid traditions and enduring their passive-aggressive comments. This year, I hosted a chosen family Thanksgiving at my apartment with Elaine, Marcus, Rachel, and a few close friends. To boundaries and new beginnings, Marcus toasted, raising his glass. And a family we choose, Rachel added, squeezing my hand. 2 days after Thanksgiving, a manila envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside were the torn pieces of my counter invoice, taped back together haphazardly with a handwritten note. This is what we think of your feelings. It was a petty, childish gesture meant to hurt and provoke. A year earlier, it would have devastated me. Now it only confirmed that I'd made the right decision in creating distance. I showed the envelope to Rachel when she came over that weekend. They really don't get it, do they? She said sadly. No, I replied, and maybe they never will. I'm starting to accept that. As Christmas approached, my mother's messages grew more emotionally charged, full of references to family tradition and last Christmas together, implying health issues she wouldn't specify. My father remained coldly practical, still occasionally mentioning payment options, as if the last 3 months of estrangement hadn't happened. I sent them a neutral Christmas card, wishing you peace in the new year, with no mention of the conflict or their bill. It was the most I could genuinely offer. In the silence of my apartment that Christmas Eve, looking at the small tree, Elaine had insisted we decorate to reclaim the holiday. I felt a complex mixture of grief and liberation. I was mourning the parents I'd never had, while celebrating my freedom from the parents I did have. And in that bittersweet moment, I realized something important. The family fracture wasn't new. It had always been there, a fault line running through our relationships. All I'd done was finally acknowledge its existence, instead of continuing to pretend the ground beneath us was solid. 6 months after the confrontation, I sat in Dr. Curtis's office for our regular session. The spring sunlight streamed through her office window, catching dust motes in its beam. Tiny things made visible only in the right light, much like the dynamics I'd been exploring in therapy. "How are you feeling about your decision to maintain limited contact?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. More confident every day. There are still moments of doubt, especially when my mother sends one of her "I just don't understand what we did wrong" messages. But those moments pass more quickly now. The half year since the confrontation had brought significant changes to my life. At work, I'd received a promotion to senior developer, partly because my improved mental health had allowed me to focus more fully on projects. My relationship with Elaine had deepened. We were discussing moving in together when her lease ended in the fall. Most notably, my friendship with Rachel had blossomed into the supportive sibling relationship we'd been denied growing up. We spoke almost daily, and had started a tradition of Sunday brunches, where we could talk openly about our childhood and our ongoing journey of understanding our parents' impact. "And how has the limited contact been working?" Dr. Curtis asked. "Better than I expected," I replied. "The email-only boundary gives me space to process their messages before responding. I don't feel ambushed anymore." My parents had settled into a pattern of weekly emails, my mother's emotional and indirect, my father's brief and businesslike. Neither had explicitly acknowledged the issues I'd raised, but the aggressive demands for payment had stopped after about 3 months of my consistent boundary setting. "I notice you've been talking more about your future plans and less about your parents in our recent sessions," Dr. Curtis observed. "That seems significant." She was right. Gradually, my parents were taking up less space in my mental landscape. They were becoming what they should have been all along: important, but not central characters in my life story, rather than the defining force around which everything else revolved. The limited contact had freed me from the constant cycle of seeking approval, facing disappointment, and trying harder. Without that emotional drain, I had more energy for the people who genuinely cared about me and the pursuits that brought me joy. Elaine had noticed the change too. "You laugh more easily now," she told me one evening as we cooked dinner together. "And you don't apologize for existing anymore." My relationship with her had flourished in the healthier emotional environment I was creating. We'd started discussing marriage not as an immediate plan, but as a possibility that felt right for both of us. These conversations inevitably led to discussions about family. "I'm scared of repeating their patterns," I admitted to her one night. "What if those tendencies are buried in me somewhere waiting to emerge?" "The fact that you're asking that question already puts you miles ahead," she reassured me. "You're doing the work to understand the patterns so you can break them." My chosen family continued to be a source of strength. Marcus remained my steadfast friend, always ready with perspective when I needed it. My colleagues Stephanie and Jackson had become friends outside of work, joining our expanded social circle. And Rachel, of course, was my closest ally in understanding our shared history. The Christmas card I'd sent my parents had set a precedent for acknowledgement without engagement. I sent neutral birthday cards, a Mother's Day greeting, a Father's Day note, each signed Andreas, without the emotional labor of pretending everything was fine. In return, I received a Christmas card with no personal message, just their printed names. A check for my birthday with no card. Small acknowledgments that maintained the connection without addressing the underlying issues. I'd accepted that this might be as good as it got. My parents were in their late 50s, unlikely to fundamentally change their worldview or suddenly develop the emotional intelligence to recognize their failures. Dr. Curtis had helped me understand that my healing couldn't depend on their recognition or apology. "Acceptance doesn't mean approval," she often reminded me. "It means acknowledging reality as it is, not as you wish it were." This lesson was reinforced when, about 5 months after our confrontation, I was organizing some old photos and found a picture I'd forgotten existed. It showed my family at a beach when I was about 7, one of the rare vacations we'd taken. In the photo, my father was actually smiling, helping me build a sandcastle. My mother was laughing at something Rachel had said. Looking at that snapshot of genuine happiness made my chest ache with the complexity of family relationships. These were the same people who had handed me a bill for raising me, who had made me feel like a burden my entire life. But they were also people capable of moments of connection, however fleeting. I framed the photo and put it on my bookshelf, not to romanticize my childhood, but to acknowledge the fullness of my history. The good moments didn't negate the harmful patterns, but they were part of my story too. As summer approached, I felt ready to take another step in my healing journey. I wrote my parents a letter, not another itemized grievance, but a clear statement of what I needed from our relationship going forward. I don't expect perfection or a complete transformation, I wrote, but I do need acknowledgement that our relationship has been damaged by patterns that began in my childhood. I need respect for my boundaries. And I need to know that you see me as a person worthy of unconditional love, not as a financial investment expecting returns. I didn't expect a meaningful response, and I didn't receive one. My mother replied with vague platitudes about moving forward and letting go of the past. My father didn't reply at all, but sending the letter wasn't about their response. It was about clearly stating my needs without apology or qualification. The greatest lesson I'd learned through this ordeal was that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. By limiting my parents' ability to harm me, I was actually creating the possibility of a healthier relationship than we'd ever had before. I'd also learned that family is defined by love and respect, not by DNA. The people who had stood by me through this journey, Elaine Marcus, Rachel, even colleagues, like Stephanie and Jackson, who had offered support, they were my real family. The irony wasn't lost on me. The greatest bill my parents had inadvertently given me was the lesson of what kind of person not to become. Their transactional approach to relationships had taught me through negative example the value of genuine connection and unconditional support. As I left Dr. Curtis's office that day, 6 months after the confrontation that had changed everything, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. My parents' invoice, intended to burden me with obligation, had instead become the catalyst for my liberation. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who treated you as an obligation rather than a loved one? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding freedom from toxic family dynamics. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for your worth even when the people who should value you the most try to put a price tag on it. Thank you for listening to my journey.